back to my channel, The World of M. This is POLI-WHY episode 5. We're going to talk a little bit about education today because we have the great pleasure of interviewing the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington, Mr. Chris Reckdahl. Before we get into the interview, I want to touch base with it. My dogs are out there. If you hear my dogs barking, that's because they're puppies and I'm in a room they're not in. But whatever. We're going to get through this. As promised, I'm going to talk a little bit about the presidential and vice presidential debates. Not a lot, just a little. So I'm going to start with the first one, which all of you know was two dumpsters that were caught on fire that were slowly beating each other to death in some alley somewhere. It was horrible. Everything about it was horrible. I came away thinking not only the most negative things about Donald J. Trump, but I didn't have the best opinion of the performance of Joe Biden. And little did I realize that all of that was done on purpose. Well, I take that back. So my roommate and I were watching it. My roommate said, wow, Donald Trump is winning. Isn't he great? And I said, how is this winning? He sounds insane. And he sounds rude and disrespectful. And what happened to Americans that, you know, that we have to act like that? Why does anyone ever have to act like that anywhere? You have to remember, to me, it's never about what the politicians are doing or saying. It's about whether or not they want to do the kind of job that lifts people out of poverty. Because I would like to end poverty as we know it. So when you spend all your time arguing about you and your own kind of delusional arrogance and talking about how great you are and how terrible someone else is, you almost never talk about the actual people you're supposed to be working for. So I didn't see how he was winning. The whole thing was just terrible. The vice presidential debate was fine. I had two takeaways. The first one was, who the heck was Mike Pence talking to? So I run campaigns. And my old school world, the way, when you finally get to something as broad as a national debate, the goal is to broaden your audience, to try and tamper down your own biases to appeal to the most amount of people. And that's how you expand your base. That's how you get more support. That's how you win races. Mike Pence pretty much decided they either lost this race or he doesn't care. He wants a special on Fox News because he basically only appealed to his base in a way that I've never seen before. Just if you are a Christian conservative, if you are anti-abortion, anti-woman's right to choose, if you are anti-diversity, if you're anti-immigrant, you had a friend in Mike Pence. And he wasn't shy about it. He was quite proud of it. And even as Kamala Harris talked about him stacking the deck with all the judges nationwide, he goes, yeah, we put a whole bunch of conservative judges on. As though the entire country is conservative. The entire country is not conservative. But what he was doing was telling his base, hey, don't be mad at me in the future because I did what I promised. We're going to stack the court. And we're going to try and get another U.S. Supreme Court justice, even though, again, the rules that apply to Republicans are apparently different than what they apply to Democrats because, you know, yes, the president is within his right to nominate. He doesn't have to, but he did because he doesn't care about anything other than trying to have some kind of legacy that he can point to and say, I may have only been a one-term president, but I made the court much more conservative. And I don't even know why. He's never going to have an abortion. He's not even really a religious or spiritual person. It was like, I don't know, it was like quid pro quo. You know, Christian conservatives, you vote for a non-Christian conservative and I'll get you a Supreme Court justice. And of course, when Obama was in his final year of his term, the same Republican senator said, no, we need to let this election go. Even though at that time, there were 10 months to go, and right now, by the time, it's like 35 million people have already voted, and they're still doing the confirmation. So again, integrity doesn't exist within the National Republican Party. Caring about what you say, you know, anything like that doesn't exist. What I noticed about Kamala Harris's performance was, I believe it was very tempered down. I believe, as a person of color, I can sympathize with what people of color and women go through, which is we're not really allowed to be as aggressive or adversarial as white men. Whereas white men are rewarded, you know, they've got that Viking spirit. You know, white men can run down the streets of their city when their football team wins and literally torch the joint and no one says anything. They're not thugs, they're not criminals, they're nothing. They're just boys will be boys. You let someone protest on the street peacefully, you let someone protest on the street peacefully for Black Lives Matters, and suddenly they're equated to criminals and thugs, and they're burning things down and so on. Because we have to act polite in a way that white males don't have to. And I do believe that Kamala was held back by that unfortunate truth. Other than that, I think she rocked. I think she did fine. But that brings us to the third debate, which just recently happened. And I gotta tell you, my roommate Henning, he was right. Donald Trump wins when he yells, because what he tried to do in the third debate, which, it's the second presidential debate, was espouse all the same crazy tinfoil, chemtrail, Earth is flat, moon landing is fake nonsense, but in a calm voice. So without the belligerence, without that energy, without that not letting Joe Biden speak, all you got was gibberish. Just quiet, subdued gibberish. It was just bizarre. It got to the point where you didn't even know who he was running against, because he would just say anything disparaging against any Democrat in any state. In fact, he was disparaging against entire states for being majority Democrat states. Because, anyone that doesn't like Donald Trump is the enemy. That's just how he is. But what really surprised me, so Henning was right. If he's not yelling, he's actually worse. So he was doing well by yelling. But what really surprised me, to be honest about it, was Joe Biden. Because when Joe Biden actually had time to get going, I really liked a lot of what he had to say. They asked him about the crime bill in the 90s. He actually said he was wrong and he's trying to fix it. When they asked him about Black Lives Matter, he said there is systemic racism in this country. He was right in so many ways that the ways that I disagree with him, I feel more confident in some of the things. Like he says he says he doesn't want to ban all fracking, just fracking on public lands. Okay, that's cool. All fracking needs to go, because all use of oil needs to go at some point within the next 10 years. It just has to. I'm sorry, if you live off of oil, you got to find something else to live off of. Live off of some kind of electric something that isn't burning oil. We just have to. And it doesn't really matter if China or India don't. They should, because that's the only planet they're going to get as well. But it doesn't, the argument can't be no one else is doing it. That doesn't work. That goes back to the same old things that we used to hold dear. If everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you do too? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter. You do what's right because it's right. And we have to, as intelligent people, as a modern country, as a country that has been responsible for some of the greatest technological advances the world has ever seen, we need to do what's right because it's right. So I'm happy. I think Joe won that whole race. If you are mad because the Seahawks lost to the Cardinals, imagine how mad you will be if Joe Biden loses to Donald J. Trump. So let's get out there and vote. And while you're at it, vote for Cassandra Lopez Shaw. I'm going to hold my tongue because I was raised right, but there's some shenanigans here in my local county with people not quite knowing what the truth is about things, and some very unfortunate, sad, bitter things are happening. It happens all around the world. It's kind of juicy, but I'm going to save that till after the race. Anyway, we've been fortunate enough to talk a little bit about the state of education. As you know, we've been dealing with a global pandemic, which has required a bunch of governments to shut down. Well, our schools are all part of the government, our public schools. And they've been shut down, and now we're in this kind of hodgepodge situation of, are we open, are we not open, who's going, who's not going. Private schools can open because they're private. So I figure if we're going to talk about education, and, education is on the ballot, we're going to talk to someone who is currently in charge of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Chris Reckdahl. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
I am good. Thank you, Mario, for having me on, and it is very good to see you.
This has been quite a year. I'm sure you could not have expected all this.
No one anticipates a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, that's for sure. We came in here wanting to redo discipline rules, and we did that, and school finance, and we did that, and tearing down high-stakes tests, and improving grad rates. And there's all these things that we achieved, and kind of building on our strategic plan. And then 6 months ago, in every state, the world just totally changed.
Okay, you mentioned 3 key things in that statement. Tell us a little bit more about each.
Yeah, so when we came in 4 years ago, what I think was obvious to everybody is that the legislature was going to re-rack school finance. So how would they invest, meet the court's interest, really make schools more financially equitable? And that took a lot of time and energy. Obviously, that's the legislature who ultimately does that, but we were able to help guide and shape that process. So increased funding, about $3,500 per kid, a significant portion of that funded students with disabilities. And as a result, we're getting those better results. I mean, we're already seeing those graduation rates hit record highs. We track this by every student category as well. And so our students of color, their graduation rate is growing faster than the overall state average. It's still going to take way too long at the current pace if we don't keep changing practices and changing expectations of the system. But really positive things. Through all of this, we were able to dial down high stakes tests and create what we call multiple pathways to graduation. So kids could really dive into classes to demonstrate their proficiency, earn industry credentials, certificates, and all of that, instead of just, the smarter balanced test as the graduation ultimatum. So it's been pretty awesome. When I got here, there was already some work on student discipline. It is the most racially disproportionate thing we find in our data. And so we said, let's not just do this incrementally, let's tear down this thing. Well, when we looked in it, it hadn't been significantly changed in 40 years. So we had to go in and completely rethink student discipline, get rid of this concept that it's about punitive stuff. It's really about behavior intervention early to avoid students missing classes, avoid any of that stuff. So no more long-term suspensions. All parents get notified when a kid misses time. Students need individual learning plans if there is a reason why they are not in school as a result of this. Now, we saw really good results already in the first year, and then COVID hit, and then people went home last March and learned from home. And so for a while in all the states, we won't really know what discipline practices got better or worse. But boy, we are really on the right track with what we were able to do there.
Did your time in the state legislature help you with negotiations on the public school budget?
Yeah, so when I was there for 3 terms, 6 years, working on both sides of the aisle, and we were making those little baby steps. So all day kindergarten at that time, little fixes to things. The big stuff happened since I've been here in the superintendency, but those relationships mattered a lot. People knew that when we gave them data and we told them about impacts financially or programmatically, that there was trust there. And so it's been really positive to work on both sides of the aisle on that. It was, again, very bipartisan for the most part. There's definitely some things that they didn't agree on, mostly on how to pay for it, which is definitely not in my realm here at OSPI. But the purpose of the funds and the way they went about it was really cool. Particularly the fact that we've closed the funding per district down to about $1,000. It was huge and disparate many years ago. And so we've really tightened that thing up quite a bit. And that comes with funding what we call levy equalization. You've got property poor communities who still need additional support. And that's one of those bipartisan things that came together pretty well.
For those who don't understand Washington State public education, it's defined as local control, which means the state gives money to a school district. In our state, we have one of the wealthiest public school districts in the nation, Seattle Public Schools. And yet, even within that one school district, there is a great disparity between some schools, like Garfield, and other schools, like Rainier Beach. Can you help us understand why?
Yeah, and it is the district. So the funding from the state goes to a district, and then they really get enormous flexibility on how to distribute that money within a school district. And so a district the size of Seattle has, very big differences from north to south. A lot of districts, there isn't a significant difference within it, but boy, there are some districts where there are very, very big differences within the district.
Should we do anything to change that situation, or is it getting better?
Well, in the case of Rainier Beach, there's been great leadership there for a while. And before McCleary, the Seattle School District had been making significant transformation. And I think some really bright spots there, some amazing educators in that particular part of the district. I think the question for everyone who kind of watches this and thinks about this is, how much should this be about, as you said, schools and neighborhoods getting resources from the state versus a school district, and then letting a locally elected school board help figure out how to deploy in a way that is consistent with community. Right now, the state has landed on this being an appropriation to districts and then letting those school boards make that decision, but others are always, rethinking and reconsidering this kind of stuff.
So we should participate more in our local school board meetings.
I will tell you, if there is anything we have learned from this from a governance standpoint, it's how much people assumed like I had executive authority. And it turns out the state superintendent can't forcibly close schools or forcibly open schools, for example. These are local decisions, and people don't think about it, but that local school board, they're up every, half of them roughly are up every 2 years. A lot of people don't think about it. Down ballot races, they have enormous ability for transformation locally. These are pretty unsung heroes in many ways because they don't get a lot of recognition, but they get a lot of criticism when things don't go well. But our school board members are amazing. Every district has 5 except Seattle. They have a larger school board by their charter, but people should really pay attention to those school board races.
You mentioned you don't have the power to open and close schools. So, what power does the superintendent of public instruction have during a global pandemic?
Yeah, it's the best question I've gotten in a long time. It's to broker information from those who are supposed to be experts at this. So in our world, we have been in a table with the Department of Health, who are supposed to really understand CDC guidance, public health risks. These are people with tremendous professional experience in that. Labor and industries, they set safety standards for adults in our buildings. And so as a state superintendent, I have to bring to bear the legislative interest, the governor's interest, public health experts around kids and community, and L&I experts who really want to make sure that our staff are safe through all of this. Our job is to kind of help them get to good guidance, and then we're the brokers of sharing that guidance to the field. And part of what happens in this is we have to do some translation, right? So labor and industries will say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z for everybody. And we say, now hold on. As educators, our job is to let you know that if everyone's hiding behind a face covering and some students are learning speech therapy and they need to see the mouth movements of an educator, that's really important. So you need to make a different accommodation that maintains safety but allows the learning to continue. So that kind of subtlety is part of what we do. Of course, we translate all that to the education system through our guidance. And then we are responsible for making sure that we defend like heck our school districts who need flexibility in the way they resource. They've got to be able to move money around differently. And counting enrollments is going to be different. And counting attendance is going to be different in a pandemic where many students are learning from home. So part of our role is to really listen to the field and deliver that expectation to policymakers. And part of our job is to listen to policymakers and deliver that information to the field. We broker information and try to solve problems on behalf of the system.
And how are we doing as a state?
Yeah, so I also get the benefit of talking to my colleagues around the country, so I have a bit of a comparative analysis here. I think the observation is that we are well organized with respect to knowing whether we're in a high, medium, or low risk county. We have good metrics for that now. When a school board decides they're going to bring some students back in, we have a very clear health framework for what that takes. Daily screening of students and staff, a cleaning regimen, hand hygiene, a face covering, and 6 foot of physical distancing. So no state moved faster to have a really good health protocol. So I think it's gone very well for districts in terms of knowing when can I open, that's a public health question, and then when I do, how do I have to maintain safety and health? What's harder, of course, is we're local control state. So two districts in the same county might come to a different conclusion on whether they're bringing back kindergartners only first. Somebody else says, let's try to bring back K-4 first. Some communities are very political about this, and others are very deferential to their school boards. So when you have 295 different school boards, you definitely get a different interpretation of the pace of return, what they're going to negotiate locally, how they want to accommodate that, whether they're changing bell schedules differently. You get a lot of variation out there. But the framework we've established, I think, is very, very good and very consistent and appears to be some of the best stuff we see across the country.
Okay, so one way we're going to get over this is to get a vaccine. And yet we know that there are some parents that don't believe in vaccines. What are we going to do for those parents that won't give their kids a COVID-19 vaccine?
That's why I love talking to you, because you're a big thinker and you ask the toughest questions, which is really, really good. So again, my job as broker is to already tell the legislature, this may not be on your radar, but you have laws right now that permit families 2 reasons to get allow their kids in school without mandatory vaccines. One is a medical exemption. There are some kids who cannot receive a vaccine without medical risk. And the other one that still remains is a religious exemption. So families can make an affirmative declaration that based on their faith, they can't take a vaccine. Other than that, in this state, you have to have mandatory vaccine. My job is to say to the legislature, you've got something coming here. This is clearly in state law. It is unequivocal the way it is written, but you're about ready to experience a back to school scenario where a vaccine may be in play or multiple vaccines after stage 3 trials. There will be skepticism by a lot of people. Some will race to get this thing. And you better think about whether the old rules around vaccines are still going to apply to the new rules, the new experience, until this thing really gets normed, it comes at scale, people feel confident in it. You have asked the most powerful question that now keeps me awake, which is this doesn't get any easier once there's a vaccine, because there will be culture wars around that, and the legislature will really have to clarify, yep, we're sticking with our hardline rule on this, or we're going to make some exceptions around this. That is something that they're going to have to probably take up as soon as January.
How do you feel about the current state of race relations in our schools?
I think it is refreshing that this particular cycle of racial justice and dialogue in America is coming from some different places than it came in the 60s, or different places than it came in the 20s, or prior to that. We've had these waves of recognition of how unjust the system is based on race. This is coming from a lot of leaders, and you and I have talked about this in the past. I continue to believe that Cap was always right. Kaepernick got this right before a lot of people were talking about this. He wasn't anti-American, and he wasn't anti-anything. He was saying, I want to use my platform to elevate issues that I see as a Black man, and I want other people to pay attention. And he got it right. And now the whole world is talking about this, certainly the country. So I am heartened by that. That lifts me up that there are different voices and influential voices. So how does it apply to schools? Well, as we saw in prior times, you better recognize that the materials that we often bring to schools don't tell a whole story. That isn't about revising history or changing truths. It's about supplementing and bringing in the whole story. There are experiences in this country that are beautiful and positive and amazing, and they need to be complemented by our faults. We need to recognize that to become a more perfect union, you have to have recognition of the mistakes you have been making and are still currently making in schools. School discipline is just one of those. History textbooks that don't recognize the contributions of everyone who played a part in the American experience, that's part of this justice. So I think schools have a huge part to play. I think if we're serious about this, it isn't just this fleeting moment, but we get into our analysis of what we teach, how we teach it. We lift up voices. We recognize, again, all those heroic things that become part of the American lore, but we balance that with, and here's how that impacted folks. Here's how that wasn't just. Here's the story you probably weren't told about impacts. And the other thing is, here's the great contributions that contributed to that ideology about America that you weren't told. So we can lift up a lot of voices, get to a place where kids see themselves a lot more in the curriculum. That's happening through a big effort on ethnic studies right now, that is happening through racial equity training, that is happening with implicit bias training and anti-racist work. So it's an awesome moment, and I'm really glad there are different voices, because I think different people are hearing it this time.
How's your budget?
Well, thankfully, with all of that work that did go on, the legislature not only added $4 billion on an annual basis, so we're up about $3,500 per child in funding compared to where we were 4 years ago. That is a very good news story. Better salaries, better pensions. We brought healthcare to a lot more employees. And again, all those investments in programs. The best part about it is they actually define that. There's a statute that declares what basic ed is, and they submitted that to the court a couple years ago and said, this is our definition of basic ed, and now we are funding it. The court said, we agree that definition is more holistic, consistent with the court case, and there's a one-way street. You can keep adding to that definition and investing more. You can't balance your budget by saying that something isn't basic education. Like, you need a substantial research case to say, this is why we're not going to do this anymore. So every legislator we talk to says that is a really strong definition. We do not intend to go in there and mess with it. We literally think 96.5% of the K-12 budget is now protected. That does leave some things vulnerable. Levy equalization. The money we give to property poor communities to try to equalize and make the system more fair, that was not written into the basic ed part. So we have to work really hard to protect that. National board bonuses for our educators. We're #1 in the country in the excellence of our teachers. We just got a #1 ranking from Wallet Hub in terms of best states to be an educator. That wasn't by accident. But those bonuses are not defined in the basic ed statute. So there's some stuff we have to defend. We will, if you are a young person, I would say stick with this. Part of the reason we are #1 ranked is we've increased our starting salary faster than virtually any other state in the country. So you can really build a sustainable life out of this work. So I feel good about that. I'm more worried about the mental, emotional health of the individuals who come to our schools and the people who work in our schools. This thing we're doing right now is not sustainable. We have to get back to something that is more sustainable in terms of mental health for our educators and our students and families, and it's going to take time, right? This is something none of us have been through before. But I think those are where the next layer of investments are coming from. So you asked me how's my budget, and I'm telling you, I'm not done building that budget. There might be a little blip here because of our forecast council and our economic activity, but as that stabilizes, I'm right back saying, when you fix the budget model, you didn't add the counselors, the mental health supports, the nurses, the caseworkers, the family and parent outreach coordinators. There are things we can still invest in that will make a world of difference for those who still aren't getting to graduation. So I'm not done investing, and that's my story, and I'm gonna keep working hard.
Now, I've worked for music educators for almost a decade now. Tell us a little bit about music education in your opinion.
It's so powerful. Music in schools, whether we're talking voice, we're talking instrumental, we're talking expression, and we're talking about a larger form of arts here. I keep saying to everyone I talk to all around the state, never think of this as a nice to have. This is basic education. When our students are in music, whether they're playing the recorder in 4th grade or they're jumping on their first saxophone as a 6th grader or they're performing in high school, they're getting basic ed credit. It's funded as basic ed. This is a pathway for students of passion. And of course, you know from all the research you've done and all the work you've done, if we get kids engaged in the arts in general, but particularly music early, you get even better outcomes on the academic side, the way that it makes the brain operate and map. So I'm a big fan. You know, we changed our art standards here recently to add some other things because art is evolving given technology and given the world we live in. I just need people to not think about it as a nice to have. It is a fundamental basic education right. It's really hard right now. One of the things I said is we broker, and one of the things that the public health officials are struggling with is, what do you do with choir where you're singing from the diaphragm, your particulate matter goes further? What do you do in instrument where you're blowing air in? Percussion is a different world than some of this stuff. And so they've gotten down to the subtlety of like percussion, cool, but wind instruments, that's a different kind of risk. And so trying to get public health officials to do what they do well in an educational context is hard. So COVID is probably most impactful, in my opinion, on performing arts, music, and choir. And so we've got to sustain it until we can get back into our buildings, because it is a basic education component and every kid needs a shot at this stuff.
Well, Chris, this has been really educational. I'm sure my audience would love it. You are on the ballot right now. Apparently, people are voting right now, and they can choose to vote for you or your opponent. But since you are on the ballot, you can run on your record. So at the end of your first term, what are you most proud of, and what are you still working on?
Most proud that we have opened up pathways for students to graduate in ways they are passionate about, not some bureaucratic system the federal government created or even legislate towards, but students get to map a lot more of their interest towards graduation. So I'm very proud of that. The thing that I still want to keep working on is we have to ground the work in racial equity, and not just as sort of standalone thoughts, but every policy, every program, every consideration we have to ask a couple hard questions. How does it impact students of color? How does it impact students living in poverty? How does it impact students with disabilities? And that is the framework we've been building, but for the next 4 years, everything has to be grounded in that in a way that's really intentional. So you don't accidentally come across that question. Every policy gets that treatment, and as you sort of change the culture of the staff and you change the culture around the state, that becomes a normal practice. And that is going to be awesome, because then you start moving resources differently when you ask about particularly those 3 populations.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. It's great to see you. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. And obviously, we'll get back together here at some point and keep trying to solve some problems together.
I'm going to air this on Monday, the October 26th, right before Halloween, if everything goes well. To give people a chance to learn more about you, you can go to Chris's website. That's Chris, reykdal.org. There'll be a link in the description box, and it'll appear on the screen. I'm going to have some closing thoughts here. Let's see. Vote. I am so tired of this election already. I am so tired of shenanigans. I am so tired of so many things, but I need rid of Donald Trump. Hey, everybody, if you're out there and you think that there's no difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or you think Joe Biden is just as bad as Donald Trump, let me tell you something. You're wrong. Nobody is as bad as Donald Trump. Nobody on this planet is as bad as Donald Trump. In order to be worse than Donald Trump, you basically have to be killing and eating people. You have to be the subject of some kind of true crime thing. And even if he's not a bad person, which I actually think that he is, I think he's a jerk, and he doesn't pay his bills, and he stiffs his employees, and he lies. And none of those things are good things. He not only does he only care about being rich, but he lies about how rich he actually is. And it's just, none of that is what I was raised a good... None of his behavior is the behavior I was raised to model when I was being taught what a good man is versus what a crazy, selfish, narcissistic personality disorder person is. Allegedly. All of this is allegedly or my opinion. And you can't be mad at my opinion. Or you can, but, you know, touche, whatever. I probably would be mad at your opinion. But yeah, it's not true. Joe Biden is a clear step above what we have right now, if for no other reason than he actually will do the work as the president. And you know what? If you don't like Joe Biden as your president, that's okay too. You will survive. I don't like Donald Trump as my president, but he got to be it. We're about to end that. We're going to join the Joe Biden. If we don't like that, we'll end that too. And if you already don't like it, just pick a candidate that has a legitimate shot at winning. Writing in Donald Duck or writing in Bernie Sanders or writing in all these other things, it may make you feel good, but it doesn't move the needle. No one even records that. It's not like it even gets entered into something that helps. You know what helps? Funding candidates in need. The people who tend not to like big-time, big-party establishment candidates tend to like the kind of candidates that need a lot of help. If you spent as much time fundraising, doorbelling, holding community events for a candidate you believed in as you do just complaining on Facebook, you would have more candidates to choose from. That's literally what I'm trying to do. I started a company called Roots PAC. Yes, it's a political action committee. It's designed to support candidates of color, primarily. Then on the next tier, women and LGBTQ candidates. Obviously, you can be a woman and LGBTQ and of color. That's why color is primary. But it's designed to even the scales with regards to racial and ethnic biases, simply because of institutional racism. That's it. Is there institutional sexism? Absolutely. Is there homophobia abound? Absolutely. So we're trying to address all that. If you want to learn more, I'll put the link down below. If you want to donate to that, it's good. I wish I'd had it up and running in a non-COVID year. We could have helped flip the Senate. But as my parents used to make me watch on PBS, we're going to keep our eyes on the prize. So while this race winds down, we're just going to start building the next one. And I know a bunch of Republican senators that I could be through with. So I'm going to find some candidates of color, women candidates of color, LGBTQ candidates of color. And if I can't find any actual of color, I'm going to find some legitimate allies and heroes. And we're going to give them the means to win those races. And instead of being sad after the fact, we're going to celebrate the fact that the best possible candidates get through. Anyway, if you like my content, you want to hear more, like and subscribe. My next video is going to be with Maria Cristina Marone, who's going to open a second set of boxes that's been coming here to the house as we prepare for our Get Ready with Maria Halloween Spectacular. Good night, everybody, and take care. And I'm still going to say it. Go Hawks!